Now, with 52 of the 54 African states registering a case of COVID-19, many questions have been raised around the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and whether or not this will actually come into implementation mid-2020. For more on this, I'm joined in the studio by the Commissioner for the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, His Excellency Mene from Addis Ababa, joining us from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. Your Excellency, just give us a sense of the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Is it hitting some speed bumps with the outbreak of COVID-19?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Yes, we are experiencing a barrier to the date of 1st of July that was set by our heads of states, which is the date for when we should start trading in Africa, which is, as you know, a long-standing objective for Africa's integration. So it would appear that on account of the virus that we will not be able to meet that deadline. I should, however, stress that notwithstanding missing that deadline, the political will remains, the political commitment to ensure that we start trading under the AfCFTA as soon as the conditions allow, that though that political will does indeed still continue to exist. The priority has to be to save lives. Every government in Africa is quite sensibly and quite responsibly focusing on saving lives and defeating the virus. And we as a Secretariat, of course, fully support that effort. We think that every African government is doing the right thing by focusing on defeating COVID-19. We will resume our work program when the conditions allow. We will re-energize ourselves. We will go back to the drawing board and we will continue on the objective of having a free trade agreement in Africa.
Right. This has me thinking counterintuitively, Your Excellency, because I would argue that there's never been a better time for Africans to trade with Africans than now, when the Chinas of this world are out of the equation. The U.S. is grappling. Wouldn't now be arguably the best time for us to fast-track trade with one another, intra-Africa trade, even, God knows, have more cargo? And again, don't get me wrong here, I'm concentrating more on trade in goods, not services per se.
You are absolutely correct. What I refer to is that the 1st of July deadline is the deadline that we will miss because it is around the corner. And before we reach that deadline of trading on the 1st of July, we needed to have concluded the remaining parts of our negotiations, which regrettably we were not able to do in the last week of February, beginning of March. And therefore, we would not have been able to meet the 1st of July as a trading date. But as a matter of going forward, and as a matter of stimulating growth and economic development in Africa, absolutely. We don't have stimulus packages like the rest of the world. We don't have $60 billion to give to an airline industry. The only stimulus package that we have is to accelerate trade in Africa, to boost intra-Africa trade significantly above the levels where it is now. And it is the best figure now is that intra-Africa trade in goods is at around 18%. And so the resumption of trade negotiations and the implementation of the AfCFTA provides us an opportunity to provide a stimulus to economic growth in Africa. So I absolutely agree with you. The only point I was making is that the 1st of July deadline, we will not be able to meet due to this current circumstances.
Very briefly before I let you go, we do remember when President Paul Kagame was at the helm just a few moons ago, he did propose a self-financing model that relied on a few levies on particular goods. Now, at this time of a lockdown, how worried should we be on the self-financing model that was developed at the helm of His Excellency Paul Kagame at the time?
Well, we are looking at various ways of improving our own self-reliance and capacity, including the measures that His Excellency Paul Kagame put into place in 2018 when he was the chairperson of the African Union. But I think we are looking also at other tools, such as industrializing Africa in the long term. The solution to part of our problem of importing all of this necessary equipment is the lack of industrial base in Africa. So we have to accelerate our industrial development capacity, our manufacturing capacity, so that we are able to produce ventilators in Africa.
Right.
We are able to produce personal protection equipment in Africa as a long-term strategy, and become less reliant on supply chains that take us abroad. The second point, of course, in terms of a long-term and medium-term strategy, is our intellectual property rights regime has got to be sufficiently responsive. I'm talking here about patents. It must be sufficiently responsive to Africa's needs. In other words, our intellectual property rights regime must enable us to develop a generic drug industry in Africa, so that we, once again, as I say, can be self-sufficient beyond financing models, or beyond relying on the World Bank and the IMF and so on. So we have to look at what are long-term and medium-term solutions, because there will be another pandemic, and so we need to be prepared for that.
Your Excellency, pleasure to squeeze us in and make time to speak to us. That was the African Union Secretary General for the African Continental Free Trade Area, His Excellency Mr. Wamkele Mene. There you have it.